Thank you, everybody. Whoa, have I been drawn the short straw today? Is this bad luck for me? Trying to follow a song, trying to follow Carlos Kaiser and our friends from Georgia, and not only do I have to follow these unbelievable people, and I cannot sing, so I'm not going to sing, but I have to follow them by explaining the integration of the Charter on Inclusion of Persons with Disabilities in Humanitarian Action in DR policies and processes. Did anybody understand that? Matthew, you understood that? Really? Well, I don't. So, yes, it's a bit of a mouthful, but I hope that what it's going to do is follow on from the excellent presentation we just had and give us some framework, some background, and some legal policy and even governmental commitment, which actually Atif was asking for in his commitment. So, next slide, please. This week I have heard people saying that we've had too much inclusion. Believe it, I've heard it. I sound like Donald Trump there, believe it. No, I didn't mean it. I have heard people saying that there has been too much inclusion in Cancun. And me, I've even felt to myself that we've had too much of the term breaking silos. But no, we cannot have too much of a good thing. Both of these are good things. We have to make sure that what works for one policy works for all policies, and we can never have too much inclusion. Next slide, please. So this slide is a little bit texty, I'm sorry for that. I will go through it. It gives us the background on the Charter. The Charter on Inclusion of Persons with Disabilities in Humanitarian Action was launched last year at the World Humanitarian Summit in Istanbul. It is a 3-page document which was developed by over 70 stakeholders, including states, UN agencies, international civil society, and global, regional, and national organizations of persons with disabilities. It has now, after 1 year, already been endorsed by over 150 entities who commit to two main things: making humanitarian action inclusive of persons with disabilities and making sure that persons with disabilities can meaningfully participate in humanitarian action. It is now still open for endorsement by states, governments, UN agencies, and any organization working in humanitarian context, and organizations of persons with disabilities. And at the end of the slide, I will show you how to get there and endorse the statement. So next slide, please. It has been approved by everybody at every level. Even Ban Ki-moon last year said at the World Humanitarian Summit in Istanbul that together we have launched a groundbreaking charter that places people with disabilities at the heart of humanitarian decision making. Notice I've underlined decision making. This is the crucial point. No longer are we seen as only vulnerable and beneficiaries, but we are seen as an essential part of the solution. In fact, we are seen as the essential part of the inclusive solution. Next slide, please. So, as I said, it's a simple document. I'm not going to read it. It's only 3 pages. I encourage you to go and read it at the end. I'm going to go straight through to the 5 most important commitments. So next slide, please. The signatories' 5 main commitments are going to come shortly. And remember that this charter is focused on humanitarian action. DRR and humanitarian action are integral to each other. The whole Agenda 2030 is integral. All the components of Agenda 2030 are integral to each other. So I want you to, as I go through these 5 commitments of the Humanitarian Charter, I want you to put on your DRR hat. Remember that the Charter is designed for humanitarian action, but I want you to think in terms of disaster risk reduction. Next slide, please. The first commitment is non-discrimination. We know that persons with disabilities are historically discriminated at all levels. The Charter condemns and eliminates all forms of discrimination. It guarantees protection and equal access to assistance. It facilitates protection and safety of children, and it focuses specific attention to the situation of women and girls. So it looks at discrimination broadly, and it focuses on the specifics of discrimination where, for example, children, women and girls are more at risk to discrimination, to abuse and to neglect. Again, think in DRR when implementing DRR programs. Come to the Charter and you see how to ensure non-discrimination. Next slide, please. We've heard enough about participation. The Charter promotes meaningful involvement of persons with disabilities at all stages of disaster risk reduction efforts. So from the planning, from the policy, from the implementation to the monitoring and evaluation of disaster risk reduction programs, persons with disabilities must be at the table, and they must be at the table knowing about disaster risk reduction. That's where the word meaningful comes in. As we heard in the previous presentation, persons with disabilities are not unlike anyone else in the community. The only reason that we are not as visible as everybody else is because of barriers. We have the same proportion of people with leadership skills. We have the same proportion of people with experience and other capabilities. In fact, when it comes to accessibility, we are disproportionately available. We are experienced in dealing with accessibility problems. When you need to solve an accessibility solution, come to the experts. We are the experts. And the Charter aims to foster community-based protection mechanisms. Sounds a bit vague. What that means is that it aims to ensure that communities are built in a way that persons with disabilities are capacitated to take meaningful part in projects. Next slide, please. It ensures inclusive policy. That means ensuring that states and stakeholders work to make their policies inclusive of persons with disabilities. We're not looking at reinventing the wheel, we're looking at basing on existing frameworks and standards, and we're looking at ensuring that data is disaggregated by disability. Remember, we don't know how to do our programs unless we know our population, and we don't know if our programs have been effective unless we know our population. Next slide, please. Next slide. It aims to ensure that response and services are inclusive. The first 2 points are the typical twin-track approach, making sure that basic services, the services that everyone needs, are accessible to people with disabilities, and making sure that people with disabilities have access to any specific services that they might need, including, for example, assistive technology like wheelchairs, hearing aids, etc. It aims to eliminate barriers and aims to ensure accessibility of services. All signatories to the Charter commit to these things. Next slide, please. And aims to ensure that cooperation and coordination among national, local authorities, facilitating cross-learning, bringing people with disabilities and DRR experts to the table, making sure that they learn from each other. Ensures that people with humanitarian and development skills come together, making sure that the Charter works for the long term. And on a personal level, sensitizing staff and authorities on the rights of people with disabilities and how to identify and include them. Next slide, please. Is it relevant to DRR? Of course it is. There is potential for DRR activity in every sector of development and humanitarian work. We know this. And in the Charter, it specifically states that signatories to the or endorsers to the Charter specifically commit to implementing Sendai in an inclusive fashion. Next slide, please. Is it obligatory? Well, yes. The Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities states that persons with disabilities have equal right to enjoy their rights along with all other persons in society, and the Charter is actually a tool to implement the CRPD. The CRPD is a long document. The Charter is 3 pages. So the Charter can actually be seen as a tool to implement the Sendai Framework, to make it inclusive. Next slide, please. Remember I said it's a simple document. Go there, take 20 minutes, read it. Next slide, please. And there's the link. Ensure that your organization, that your state, that your government views the Charter, endorses the Charter, and makes sure that all DRR and humanitarian work is implemented in a fashion that is inclusive of everyone, including persons with disabilities. Thank you.